So last time we talked about some properties of parallelograms. So this time let's talk about some special parallelograms. And the one we start off with is our rhombus. So again, on the left side we see rhombuses, on the right side we see not rhombuses. So what's a rhombus? So you might notice that a rhombus has the opposite sides being parallel. Okay, all the opposite sides are parallel. But notice something else about the opposite sides. Like this one's marked with one hash mark on all four sides, and this one's marked with two. Whereas some of these over here, opposite sides parallel, and those are congruent, but those are different but congruent. This just has 5 equal sides. So what's a rhombus? What if we say that a rhombus is a parallelogram? Did you notice that's a parallelogram? Not with that many L's though. It's a parallelogram first because the opposite sides are parallel with congruent sides. So that's a nice little definition for a rhombus. But I got something that's even better. I'll show you another one I like. So another one that I like is that a parallelogram, don't do that. A parallelogram is also an equilateral quadrilateral. Okay, it's a quadrilateral with 4 equal sides. Do you remember before that we said that a parallelogram had opposite sides congruent? So if it has all 4 pairs of sides congruent, if it's equilateral, then it has to be a parallelogram, it has to be a rhombus. So I like that definition, the equilateral quadrilateral. It's fun to say, it's concise. I kind of think that's cool. So let's talk about some rhombus things, a little bit more geometry sketchpad. Here we go. Let's go to our rhombus. So I got rhombus A, B, C, D here. And I want to take a look at some of the angles of the rhombus. Let's click the angles and see what happens. Ooh, that was interesting. What'd you notice? So you saw that green one, that purple one pop up, and it kind of rotated a little bit. So those angles are congruent to the others. So what do these diagonals then do to the angles of the rhombus? They kind of cut them in half, so they bisect each other. The diagonals of a rhombus bisect each other. That's a big one. That's a good one. The diagonals bisect the angles of the rhombus. So diagonal AC cuts angle A and angle C in half, makes 2 equal congruent angles. Let's do something with the diagonals now as well. Oh, it just pops up as a 90-degree angle. Let's see, does that always work? If I drag this baby around a little bit, if I move this around a little bit, it looks like no matter what I do, the diagonals make a 90-degree angle. Remember that word for makes a 90-degree angle? Oh, they are perpendicular. We love it. So let's go check this out. So a couple things about a rhombus. First of all, the diagonals of a rhombus bisect the angles of the rhombus. That's big conjecture number 1. And then the next one is that the diagonals of the rhombus are perpendicular. They make a 90-degree angle. So 2 cool things about the rhombus. The diagonals bisect the angles, and the diagonals are also perpendicular. It's all about the diagonals today, my friends. All about the diagonals. So that's the rhombus. Let's keep rocking and rolling. Let's talk about a rectangle. You see rectangles on the left. You see not rectangles on the right. What is a rectangle? So if you've noticed the ones on the left, the opposite sides are parallel, so it's a parallelogram. Okay, we'll start typing that. It's a I always type 3 L's there, I don't know why. A parallelogram with, now it looks like these 4 angles are congruent. And I might remember that in my quadrilateral sum conjecture that the angles add up to 360. So if they're all congruent, dividing 360 by 4 gives me 90. So do you want to say a parallelogram with right angles maybe? We could do that. Or, do you remember what we did with the rhombus before? We said it was an equilateral quadrilateral. Well, what about if we say that this is an equiangular? How about that word, huh? You say that a couple times, people go like, wow, you're a geometer. You're awesome. You're my friend. So let's say it's an equiangular quadrilateral. That kind of ties in with our equilateral quadrilateral with the rhombus. And notice that this one up here is not a rectangle. And you're saying, but it looks like a rectangle. Aha, but it looks like a rectangle. If I knew that the four angles were equal to each other, or if I knew that they were right angles, then I could say it's a rectangle. But they're not marked, so I can't assume that. Alrighty, so if we scooch over to Geometry Sketchpad for a minute, I think I got a rectangle tab. Yep. So I got my diagonals drawn. I want you to check out the diagonals. Are you ready? Here we go. Oh, that's just so cool. So tell me something about those diagonals. Diagonal BD went up and then rotated and landed right on top of AC. Did you say that the diagonals were congruent? Oh, you're so good. And I think that's our conjecture. Let's check it out. Bam. Yep, the rectangle diagonals conjecture. The diagonals of a rectangle are congruent. Drag that dog up there. Here we go. Diagonals of a rectangle are congruent. I love it. Now, let's talk finally about a square. So if you think about a square has four equal sides. So a square is a rhombus. But it also has four 90-degree angles. So it's a rectangle as well. So a square is both a rectangle and a rhombus. It's an equiangular, equiangular. It's an equiangular equilateral. Boy, I can't spell today, huh? Equilateral, quadrilateral. That's what it is. But we know what that word means. We know what it means to be equiangular and equilateral. Do you remember that? That means it's a regular quadrilateral, regular meaning all sides and angles equal. Or my favorite is a rectibus. And it's not going to it is going to tell me I spelled it right. It's a rectibus. So here's the deal with a rectibus. A long, long, long time ago, a square was actually called a rectibus because it was a combination of a rectangle and a rhombus, kind of like brunch is breakfast and lunch. But then they invented the school bus. And geometry students were scared to get on the bus because they thought it would get into an accident. They thought they'd wrecked the bus. So with all these scared geometry students, the federal government decided, okay, we're going to change rectibus to square. I'm only kidding. But anyway, so let's talk about the diagonals of a square. If I combine the three conjectures I just did before to talk about the diagonals of the square as diagonals of rectangles and rhombuses, I know the diagonals of a square are congruent because it's a rectangle. So let's throw that first one up there. You know, we'll write it all in one big thing. We know that they are congruent. We also know because it's a rhombus that they're perpendicular. And also because it's a rhombus, they bisect the angles of the square. That's what they do. So we can throw that kind of like right there. So the diagonals of a square are congruent, perpendicular, and they bisect the angles of the square. So would you like that rectibus? Oh, it's one of my favorite things.